But now we are going to be moving on to Alex Naraniecki. And some of you may already know Alex from his contributions on the Critical Rationalism Facebook group. But for those of you who don't know him, Alex is an Australian like me. He's in Brisbane. He decided to do a PhD on Karl Popper. So that resulted in a book which was titled Returning to Karl Popper, and several published papers, which you can find online as well. So I'm just going to quickly mute Deanna, because I think we might be getting some background noise coming from there. Okay, yeah, so the reason we have him here today is to let him tell us a bit more about his PhD adventures. And Margarita, I believe you want to have a conversation with him about that, which is going to be completely open and interactive as well.
Yes, so Alex, if you could maybe unmute yourself. So anyone can, whenever you have a question, just use the raise your hand feature or wave, but it's easier to use the raise your hand feature. So I was just this, obviously the first question was, how did you decide, how did you get to know Karl Popper, but how did you decide to actually make it the focus of your dissertation, your thesis? Yes, how did you come across Karl Popper?
Okay. Well, it seems like such a long time ago. The finer details I've probably forgotten. But first of all, before I go into that, I would just like to say it's really wonderful to see all your faces here and finally have a chance to have this sort of discussion. So it's the first event like this I've been involved in perhaps over 2 years. So it's really, I've come out of a bit of a reclusive sort of period. So yeah, it'd be good to continue having these discussions in the future, hopefully. The reality is it's, you can have all the wonderful ideas that you want, but when you have young kids, if you know when the milk has run out in the fridge, you have to go out and get it. So the basic sort of requirements of job and work and looking after their kids take precedence at the moment for me in this stage of my life. So the Popper thing has been put on the back burner a little bit. But in terms of how I got into Popper, it was, I think it was deciding on doing a PhD in itself is a really sort of, I think a very difficult sort of, a big issue at the moment, because when I was thinking of embarking on a PhD, it was still considered a reasonable career option, number one. So there was a practical rationale for doing a PhD. Why I decided to do one on Popper, I was thinking of doing a PhD on basically a European liberal thinker. I went to a secondhand bookshop in Brisbane and yeah, found The Open Society and Its Enemies, found its The Self and Its Brain, and found his autobiography there. So it's basically those three books were one of the main reasons why I decided to do the PhD on Popper. But I think I need to step back a little bit to just explain why I decided to do a PhD. And one of the reasons was practical and personal. See, my family, I grew up in Adelaide, and if anyone knows anything about Adelaide in Australia or South Australia, Adelaide is a very unique sort of place in Australia. It was a non-convict settlement that had its own particular sort of norms and ways of, it's its own place pretty much. And then I moved to Queensland when I was at university. And when moving into Queensland, particularly to Brisbane, the particular culture of this place, Brisbane, is a very unique place. It's basically, the way I can explain it to Americans, it's basically something like Texas or something. So going from Adelaide to Brisbane was a bit like going from somewhere, say, like Boston to Texas, a massive culture shock. And when I arrived in Brisbane, I studied as an undergrad, I studied literature and history primarily, with electives in cognitive psychology and biological psychology. So I had that sort of overlap there. So that cognitive and psychological, cognitive biology cognitive and biological psychology will come in handy later with the Popper stuff. So it probably sort of enabled me to later get into the Popper a bit deeper than what I otherwise would have. But it's not a usual background to come from a literary historical background into Popper philosophy of science. I think that is a very sort of unusual sort of approach. But I think there's particular strengths in this approach, and that if you study literature, particularly poetry and things, you have a particular way of focusing in on words, recurrent use of words, and phrases and other things. So I think because of that, when I came to approaching Popper's text, I perhaps approached this text differently to, say, someone who did an undergrad in science and then moved into philosophy later. So I think I think that's a crucial part of the story as well, that when I look at Popper's text, I really do look very closely at the words on the page.
So if I may interrupt, Alex, so if I hear you say correctly, you discovered Karl Popper in a bookstore.
Almost in a synchronous sort of way, yes.
Yeah, and you just picked up a book and you didn't really know about him, and there was no one saying you need to read it because you need to take a course and you're going to get a grade in the course, and so therefore you need to read Popper if you want to get a grade. It was purely the book. And if I may say, I find that very interesting because that's the way I discovered your work. I was looking, and I'm just saying that because there is a punchline to the story. So I was looking online for Lacan. Jacques Lacan, he has like a triad in his thinking: the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. And so I was thinking, now, is this similar or different to Popper's three worldviews? And so I'm looking on a Lacan website, and there you have a comment about your book, and you're inviting those Lacanians to read your book on Karl Popper. And so that's the way I got your book. But then in your book, someone I don't know, but I'm reading the book, The Words, World 3, then I see a footnote in which Nimrod's work is discussed in great detail, the revolution in extensional logic. And I had never heard about Nimrod until that point, but of course then I got immediately Nimrod's book. And so the reason I bring that up is because for me, this is all World 3, because I didn't know anything about Popper until I picked up his book. And then I started reading it, and I thought, wow, this is a book that explains that reading of books is actually significant and not trivial. And so I wanted you to comment on that, and maybe also at some point Nimrod, whether you and Alex interacted with each other, since if I may add another layer to the conversation, what I picked up from your book, Alex, is that you paid attention to that Popper was talking over and again about the distinction between the descriptive and the argumentative function.
I think we'll hold it there. We can move into, first of all, I like to say, if I knew Lacanians were reading my post, I probably would have deleted it. We'll just leave that there. That's, sorry, a joke about Lacanians. I couldn't help myself there. But how I came to that particular bookstore was basically when I was studying at Griffith University. No one knows about Griffith University, but when I was fortunate enough to study there, it was the same time Wayne Hudson was also lecturing there. I don't know if anyone here is aware of Wayne Hudson, but he's probably the most creative and interesting philosopher in Australia at the moment, and that's something that's quite it's something that's quite, you know, he has a particularly strong reputation in Australia at the moment, but not so much you know, still outside of Australia. So I think for anyone who's not familiar with Wayne Hudson, you can contact me later and I can provide a bit more information. He's basically better known for his work on Ernst Bloch, the Marxist utopian thinker, and he did his PhD in Oxford under Leszek Kolakowski. So there's a strange Polish link running through there as well. So basically, I would suggest write this down, Wayne Hudson, have a look at some stuff online, and then you'll see that the kind of the intersection between Wayne Hudson and his suggestion of me looking at these very Central European or European liberal thinkers, and then Popper on the other side, you can see it was a kind of almost a formidable sort of vortex that I was caught in. And on top of this, I was very lucky to have a couple of very good friends as well. Particularly a Soviet-born Russian intellectual, Andreas, he's just an absolute genius, and he studied with Wayne, and he's one of these characters that whenever I'm working on something for a month or 2 months or even longer, and then I show it to him, he picks up the thing in a few minutes, if not a few seconds. So we all need someone like that around. So I was very lucky to be in a very small network or very small cohort of students around Wayne Hudson at Griffith University at a particular time, where very interesting things were happening in the middle of Brisbane, which is basically the capital of a mining city, a mining state. So a very anti-intellectual state. So I think that kind of practical context matters almost more than anything. That kind of the environment, the atmosphere that someone is in, these sort of incidentals, the people you're around, determine whether you continue on with something as, you know, something like a PhD, which is utterly crazy this day and age to do, or whether you go on to do something else more practical, like a Doctor of Jurisprudence or you know, some sort of more practical degrees. And I think that's the kind of and unfortunately there's for those considering doing a PhD, there's not as much opportunity to have these interesting sort of groups or associations of students and around professors that we did have even just 20 years ago, due to the sort of the way universities have been evolving in a more corporate business direction. So I think I was definitely a product of a particular time and place. 5 years later, the opportunity to do a PhD wouldn't have existed. Wayne, he left to another university. And yes, I mean, basically, in the last couple of years since COVID, massive redundancies in the university sector in Australia all around. So it really is, you know, quite depressing in many ways. And this is kind of a point about this sort of online forum and what Look and others have been doing here that's so important, that I've been following over the last couple of years. And this is a classic example of the way of Popper's theory of institutional emergence and institutional evolution, that from a small thing like a Facebook page, you kind of evolve and develop bigger and bigger sort of more sophisticated, more elaborate institutional arrangements around that, such that you can have an event like this, which is really not a non-affiliated event, that is, you know, quite a few that it basically has people from all around the world participating. and academics from around the world. So it really shows that the Popper, it really exemplifies Popper's view on organic evolutionism in a very practical, pragmatic sense. So I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, so to get back to, so Wayne Hudson, like, provided for you like a safe space, he protected the space for you to do the work that you decided to do after you had read a book, just by someone you actually didn't know, but then you wanted to know. And then, so my next two questions are going to be like, just you decide to go to Europe, to the archives. Now, did you speak German already, or did you decide to learn German? And then also, of course, we're going to discuss a little bit the content of your book. But so first, did you know German? Did you, or did you, for the love of Karl Popper, decided to study German?
Well, yeah, I decided to study German because, I mean, my family from Eastern Europe, so my grandparents all spoke about 4 languages,
Okay.
German,
Yeah.
Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, English, and we're literate in those languages as well. So it's kind of, we had a lot of linguistic background. We came to Australia. We lost a lot of that. My honours thesis was actually on multiculturalism in Australia, looking at sociology, particularly the Polish sociological tradition, which kind of leads into Popper in various ways, because the Polish sociological tradition drew upon a lot of the traditions of Polish logicians and mathematicians that Popper would later also draw upon, like Tarski. And, you know, you'll find theories like the idea of falsification coming out in Florian Naraniecki's work and other thinkers as well before Popper. So falsification is nothing new. It didn't come up in Popper. It was out there before, but Popper's kind of the, you know, he did other things with it, which are very important.
You all right?
Yep, hello, yep. Look, finally, oh, sorry, he's coming, he's gone. Did you want to say something, look?
No, Luke had accidentally forgotten to turn off his mic. It was on another laptop. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. But the thing is, I've always had a great respect for languages and great enjoyment of learning languages. So every year, basically in my 20s, I pretty much studied a second language on the side just for fun. So I studied German just before I went to Austria, but it was really only in Austria at the Popper archives that, you know, needing to speak German in a day-to-day context, that have really sort of ramped up my linguistic ability in German.
Okay.
So that's so that was a side benefit of studying in Klagenfurt rather than, say, basically the Hoover Institute.
So how did you end up in Klagenfurt? I'm asking these questions also because there is here someone from South America who likes to do a thesis or PhD thesis on Karl Popper, and so then the question is like, yeah, just you learn German basically by just being in Klagenfurt and practicing it. You had already some knowledge. But so the journey, like, how did you decide on particular topics, and how did you stay in Klagenfurt? How long? For a couple of months? For
Well, I was there for 6 months. So it was,
okay, very good.
It was, I think perhaps because I was so young, I didn't realize what I was doing. So I was very naive, and I somehow organized an exchange agreement between my university, Griffiths, and Klagenfurt. I didn't even realize I was doing it, but it happened, and Griffiths made money out of it. So they were happy to send me over there, because then they got students from Klagenfurt later coming to Australia, but enabled me to study for free, and yeah, for half a year, and look at the Popper archives. So basically, when I went to Klagenfurt, I mean, the first thing I did was go to, basically when they got settled in, was go to the archives, and I spent a good 6 months pretty much almost living in the archives. And all I did when I was there was just basically read his letters, just read. I just sat there day in, day out. I read, I looked at his books, I spent time with his books, and there's something I think that happens when you are in the library of someone else. There's something you can feel. You can almost, I mean, you can feel the presence of something when you especially Karl's library. I mean, it was his library. His dad's books were there. His vintage books were there. I mean, I think on the first day there, man, I think the bibliotheque director, Manfred, he was absolutely outstanding. He showed me basically, he got out the key and brought out some of Karl's vintage books, you know, like the first edition of Kepler's Weltharmonik and you know, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and the original editions, and so you just to have that experience as well, that sort of World 1 as well as World 3 experience, if you will, was just a absolutely amazing opportunity, and it's just an absolute pleasure. I mean, when you're reading kind of the letters, particularly, as well as the drafts of articles and things, but particularly the letters, going back from his early letters, struggling to read in German, and then his later letters in English that were much easier for me at that time. You could get a sense of a story, sort of every day I'll go in and a little bit more of the story will come through. You know, the next decade will pass. I mean, I'll read about Popper complaining about his, you know, his back or his cataracts when writing the Open Society or something. So that those sort of little personal details, and then kind of, you know, other more sort of serious sort of theoretical, you know, arguments and discussions coming out in the letters that you know, that they help to illuminate the you know, an understanding of the development of his thought at various stages of his life. So that, I think that basically a good 6 months, and that was, I think that was I barely just touched the surface of what was in there. Unfortunately, the problem was at the archive, the letters with the material, the original documents were so poorly photographed that I could barely read them even back then. I think someone really did a really bad job in photographing them from the Hoover Institute. Some of them were just not legible. So and I think the University of Klagenfurt, they really didn't want the Popper archives there because it was expensive. It's expensive to run an archives. I mean, you need space, you need electricity, you need someone to manage it. So I don't think they really wanted it there. I think that was one sense as well. The computer they had there was absolutely ancient. But 6 months was great. I would love to spend another 6 months one of these days if that's continued, but you at least need a few months, because the first, I mean, just to get your head around what's there and what might be of interest, that just navigating those resources takes time.
I saw Elise raising her hand for a while, but I can't see her picture, so Elise?
I was actually going to ask, what was the most interesting thing you found in the letters?
Oh, well, it's, oh, geez, it's something I really should know. Like I said, I haven't looked at that material for perhaps over a decade now. In the last 2 years, I haven't looked at anything. But it's, in terms of letters, the most interesting thing.
Did you read the ones between him and Schrödinger?
I can't even remember now. Probably not. Maybe not. Maybe not. I can't recall that. The Carnap letters stood out a bit. The letters to Isaiah Berlin were also quite interesting. I think Jeremy Sherman suggested looking at that. So I have to thank Jeremy for suggesting a few things to look at. So but basically, I mean, the letters went. Okay, here it is. It's coming back slowly. Excuse me if I'm, you know, a bit a bit slow at getting to the point. Reading his letters when he was trying to get out of Austria, and then reading his letters when he was trying to get out of New Zealand because he was sick of it to the UK. I think all of those were just fascinating, just from an autobiographical point of view, getting to almost you know, to know, you almost felt like kind of, you know, getting to know the person behind the philosopher. I think that was absolutely fascinating, and the sense of urgency and a sense of panic, particularly with some of those letters. It was yeah, I think that was yeah, on a humane level, that kind of, yeah, really getting to see some of that.
Was that the sense of urgency to get out of New Zealand or to finish the Open Society?
Well, all sorts,
Yeah.
both, but I think after a while, you know, the thing is, yeah, I mean, I can sort of sympathize for, even though I was born in Australia, I kind of can put myself in headspace of a European in the Antipodes, particularly. I mean, my grandparents, I mean, they were crying when they came to Australia, first of all, because there was nothing here. They came from Europe. I mean, even a war-torn Europe to Australia, there was kind of really nothing here. So I can sympathize with you know, the sense of the alienation or the unheimlich sort of, you know, feel that this part of the world can have. So it was all of that. There was, you know, the issues with printing, with paper, publishing, also a whole range of things that were little details, that things that we just take for granted now, that, you know, back then, access to books, access to music, and you know, for given Popper's music. I mean, here's another thing. I mean, that's been completely almost ignored. I mean, Popper the musician. I mean, we really have to think of this as a, you know, this is another one of his hidden comportments. This is someone who really thought, in a way, a composer would almost think, with counterpoint and everything, and all that comes out of his text as well. So you can imagine him going to New Zealand and then finding that he went to a local, basically, you know, store to buy a few you know, music vinyls, and just the disappointment in the quality. So basically, kind of the yeah, being, I think that kind of whole culture shock came out in the letters.
I believe he actually wrote a piece of music, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. That's online now. You can see that. How, I mean, it's hard to know what to think about that, because it basically, I think it was almost, I don't know how good his hearing was by the time he heard. I don't know how much he had to do with the actual sort of composition of, and in terms of the orchestration and all kind of the, I mean, the interpretation of that, how true that would have been to what Popper had initially envisaged of that particular fugue. Had he heard that, maybe had that someone gone out and performed that 20 years earlier. So
I'm sorry.
Consider how long he was in London or in the UK, and no one bothered to really treat his music seriously. I think that was almost a fame. By the time they got around to it, he could barely hear. So I think there was a strange sort of, I mean, yeah, I think a lot was you know, was unfortunately overlooked with Popper during his lifetime, and some of his letters, back to his letters, especially his letters in the 80s. I remember reading letters, and he'll lament that people stopped taking ideas seriously in the 80s, sort of thing. And I wonder what he would think now. If people stopped taking ideas seriously in the 80s, what would they think about the corporate, what would he think about the corporate university now?
So
yeah.
Alex, if you could share in the chat or via an email and now we can share it with everyone else. This about Karl Popper's music online. And then I just want to go to John, who has his hand up and may have a question for you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just want to mention, I was at the archive about 2 weeks ago, and Thomas Heinschko does a fantastic job of organizing all that. And to anybody who wants to do research in Popper, if you sign the proper contract and all, and you get in touch with him, he'll send you bits of the correspondence. I took the opportunity of getting some of his correspondence with Brian McGee. Haven't got a chance to get into it yet, but that's a kind of a project I've had to push off because I've been doing other things. But yeah, he'll send you some of that, and I'm sure from the point of genuine intellectual development of Popper's, that some of that correspondence is going to be very, very interesting. I know that Mark Letourneau did quite a lot of work with that. His book Popper and Hayek goes deeply into his correspondence with Hayek, and there's a lot of insight that comes out of such things. And I think Rafe did something a bit of with his correspondence to Tulloch and things like that. So you can get specific bits of correspondence for any kind of work, and it is it can be revealing, to see what he said to other thinkers, at the time. Yeah. And on top of that, I just wanted to add, I think the fantastic thing about Popper is that he solved so many of the problems that philosophy has had and still has, unfortunately. The incommensurability thesis. Nimrod, I loved your piece on the twilight of incommensurability. From your mouth to God's ear, that incommensurability gets overcome. But there's so much for Popper in the 21st century. It's just, I hope we manage to spread the word as much as possible, get more and more people interested in it.
Mm.
All right, so we now have Dennis Noble.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So Dennis will be your featured speaker in 3 hours or 2 hours and a half. But thank you for being here right now. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question that concerns his correspondence with Max Perutz. And I don't know whether you've studied that. Now, my understanding is that when he gave the 1986 lecture to the Royal Society, first, it was never published by the Royal Society. It has, of course, been made available later by the German author Neumann, isn't it? Yes, who made it available, which is extremely important because I think that reveals enormous detail in relation to what was going on there. But a lot of that must be in the correspondence with Max Perutz. Effectively, as I understand it, Perutz was determined to convince Popper that he was completely wrong about evolution, and that Popper tried very hard to convince Perutz that it could not be that life is just chemistry, and that therefore one had to take account of the active, purposive nature, creative nature of organisms. So I'd be very interested indeed in what you found. Is there the correspondence with Perutz? Has it been published? Have you any intention to publish it? That would be what I would like to know.
Okay, Dennis, thank you so much for that. I've had a look at some of your work, and I think, first of all, I'd like to say, basically, where I think Popper's thought is relevant going forward is not so much in the debates concerning induction or deduction or falsificationist method and all that kind of thing, because largely that's all part of popular knowledge now. I mean, generally everyone agrees that, you know, you have to be strict in terms of attempting to falsify theories. And so a lot of the Popper's methodological thought is basically part of stock standard, you know, background knowledge that everyone takes, even without understanding Popper. Where his work is of interest going forward is in this kind of space of cognitional theory and evolutionary theory, so the area of biosemiotics and bringing teleology back into evolutionary thought and this whole area. So I think I'll be very interested to have a look at your work, because I think that's exactly, especially in an age in which we are doing such catastrophic damage to environment, to humans, by reducing humans to machines, and all the horrors of what that practically does to people in the workforce, in the family. I mean, basically, I think there's a lot to be excavated, particularly in Popper's later thought, that goes some way to redressing a reductionist, materialist view of the world. And I think Popper did a lot in his later years towards that end, but it really hasn't been picked up enough, because everyone's still focusing on Popper before he retired. I mean, it's amazing that Popper started in such a sober discipline of scientific methodology, but really came out, really sort of evolved that in a very sort of interesting way, such that by the end of his life, he was one of the most important speculative philosophers of the 20th century, one that was really trying to undo the kind of the damage of a disenchanted Newtonian cosmology that we kind of inherited, that we're still all stuck with. So I think there's yeah. Anyway, so that's my little rant. But back to answer your question. I haven't looked at those letters at all. I have no awareness of it. I mean, the thing is, his correspondence, it was, I mean, there's just so much to really excavate there. I mean, it's I haven't looked at nothing. I'm not working in any of that area. I'm really not working on any research at all at the moment. I'm not working in the university sector at all. So it's, unfortunately, I can't sort of
Okay,
provide.
but Alex, we're going to do something about that. We're going to figure out a way to get you back on board. Now, Dennis, last time Thomas Hancho was with us and he gave a little tour of the archives. And so he explained the procedure, and also, as John Rock said, so there may be a way to just contact him, and that you might just get a copy of the letters that he might send it to you. So we will investigate that, or someone of us will investigate that. But so now, Alex, I would like to go back to your work, because I think it was in your book, but I may be misremembering that you quoted the letter to Hayek, in which Popper said that he was going to use the method of diuresis. Was that something that you mentioned? Because that gets back to that distinction between the third and the fourth, and that was in the footnote where you put Nimrod's work, that you said like someone else who's working in this area. Yeah.
Yes. Look, I don't have that on. I mean, it's a long time since I've worked on those particular sets of problems, but it is interesting the way Popper does change things up by going. I mean, discussion of Hayek, and then he goes back to the Greek, and then you realize that what this person is, what Popper was basically he he was someone, even though he was writing in English, he was thinking in German, but he wasn't really even thinking in German. He was thinking in a kind of a Greek German kind of way. So the way he understood a lot of these concepts was perhaps a bit more, you know, not as what it seemed at face value in the final English text of things, as simple and as straightforward and as clear as a writer he is. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind if studying. Sorry, I can't answer too much in terms of those particular letters because I don't have those. They're not at the forefront of my mind at the moment. But what it does sort of make me sort of think is that he's a lot more interesting in German. And anyone who's thinking of studying Popper going forward, it really will help to have as much German as you can, because there's some things just don't translate very well into English. Say when Popper uses terms like Umwelt, I mean, in English it's translated as environment. That doesn't really do it justice, because environment, when we think of environment, we're thinking of, say, the natural, you know, trees and rivers and you know, that kind of thing. When Popper's speaking about Umwelt and life improves the Umwelt for itself, I mean, it has very different connotations when coming out of the German context to how it appears in English. So, yeah. Is someone, okay. Before, and I'm conscious of the fact we don't have a lot of time for this particular hour. I just like to read out a small bit from my book Return to Popper, which I think summarizes exactly my project, or what I was doing at the stage of my PhD. So basically, my main argument, well, one of them was, this book suggests that the strength of his social thought may owe something to the strength of his cosmological thinking. This opens the room for a noetic participatory reading of Popper's writings. This cosmological thinking enabled him to discern structural repetition at different circulatory manifolds of the whole, including the recurrent schemes of material transcendence. So I think that's an important point. I think everywhere in Popper's work, he's always looking at the point where materialism transcends itself. And I think this gets to Dennis Noble's work as well. Where does materialism transcend itself? And he does that sort of basically in all domains. He does that in a logical domain. He does it in his work in numerical propensities. He does it in his World 3 thesis. He even does it in kind of linguistic theory in the footnote to, not the footnote, the appendix to the Logic of Scientific Discovery on universals and dispositions, where he refers to all words having a universal content. So I think that's kind of, yeah, the important point. From this, we can draw out implications for what this means for an understanding of humanity's enclaved existence within the cosmos. His late World 3 ontology has largely been overlooked in the English-speaking world as a kind of folly of his old age, and often dismissed as the work of a positivistic-minded analytic philosopher who's gone too far and ended in some sort of Hegelian metaphysical system-building exercise. This book argues that Popper was not a positivist, and his later cosmological ontological thought did share certain features with Hegel. However, this was not a system-building exercise in a traditional sense. Rather, the similarity between aspects of his thought and that of Hegel was owing to a shared Neoplatonism. So for Popper, critical rationalism, and it's interesting you see his critical rationalism, how he enlarges the notion of rationality from, you know, basically, if it's not falsifiable, throw it out, to something like, well, we can argue for it. And so kind of, he moves from sort of an understanding of rationality. He kind of move through from that to a kind of basically to a kind of, you know, in German you'll say Geist. So a movement from rationality to Geist, to Nous. And I think without abandoning rationality and without abandoning critical rationalism. And you see, and I think that was another thing that sort of that struck me about Popper's text, that his text was so sober and so sort of unpretentious. The writing was so clear and so easy. And when you read, say, particularly his articles in Objective Knowledge, a lot of these are on very sort of, well, it's kind of like the argument is very sort of, he's very forceful. He's arguing against someone. He always had sort of someone in mind or some theory that he was forcefully arguing against. So it's very much focused on very much an example of rational argumentation at its best. But then somewhere in the text almost seems to rupture at a point. And there comes a point where it almost enters a kind of, it elevates to a kind of a poetic elevation where something else is going on here. Something other than, you know, trying to refute or disprove Lakatos or Kuno or someone earlier from one of the earlier ghosts from his Viennese past that he was still arguing against at the London School of Economics. So I think that's where Popper is interesting, that you get a sense of, one, this is a, you know, a wonderful example of rational argumentation, and it's but at the same time, there's something else going on, a counterpoint going on that behind the text, that kind of, you know, comes out wonderfully poetic. So we don't think about Popper as a poetic writer, but I think that's kind of something that, for those who are familiar with his work, no doubt, I'm sure, also realize. Yeah.
Harry, did you have a quick question before we move to the next session?
Yeah, it was, Alex just referred to the material transcending itself, and I get a little bit lost with statements like that. I was wondering whether that would be another way of talking about emergent properties, or are you saying something else, Alex?
Very much so, very much so.
Okay.
I think that's a very important part of Popper's thought, the idea that novelty arises, and particularly the human mind is an absolutely new phenomenon in the world, in the cosmos. So I think that kind of that novelty arises on different levels, on different planes, that not all of them are material or physical. That's where the world 3 comes in. But later in life, it becomes very interesting, because then he becomes more, he takes more of the sort of the Whitehead Bergsonian sort of tour, and starts really referring to everything as really being vectors and forces. So even world 1 becomes.
Can you link do you link any of that to the self and its brain that you wrote with Eccles, or not?
Yeah, well, definitely, and that's a very, yeah. Well, that I mean, it comes out I mean, I can trace his Neoplatonism back to his very early work in Vienna as well, but it really comes out in the self and his brain was outstanding. Particularly if you look at that, the best part of that I find is the correspondence with Eccles at the end of the book. So have a very close look at that. So this is Popper, the agnostic, discussing very seriously with Eccles the Christian. I think this is really something to take a close look at.
So we only have a couple minutes left. Andreas and John, if you have very quick questions, we might be able to address them quickly.
Yes, Alex, thank you very much for your paper. A quick question regarding Umwelt. Is Umwelt for Popper something individual, or is it a collective scientific imaginary, which is cognitively rooted in the capacities we all have?
He's drawing on a whole tradition in the German literature of basic of Umwelt, but it's I don't. I mean, with that one, I'm not too sure where we would. I mean, it's ultimately about the. We'll say about the we in that one. It boils down to. I mean, and you can almost see links between contemporary Buddhist philosophy in many ways. That Buddhist philosophy looks a lot at. Refers to sentient beings rather than just humans. So that comes out quite strongly, and we can see that Buddhism influenced sort of Schopenhauer quite a lot, and you know the link between Schopenhauer and Popper, and also the kind of the Sanskrit link with Schelling. So we have a lot of these Eastern ideas coming out, I think, in Popper as well, which is also very interesting. So it's kind of, it's not an individualistic project. So it's not kind of, I mean, I think that's just to summarize it sort of as quick as I can. I mean it's not it's not like, I mean individualism is important for Popper at one level, but kind of you have to keep in mind where he's discussing which particular debates. Is he talking about political debates? Who's his audience? But I think, I think the tendency to read Popper that's often happened as a kind of a libertarian, economic libertarian. He's with, he talks with Hayek, so he must be sort of part of this kind of, sort of libertarian, sort of practical Anglo common sensism kind of person. He's got that, but I don't think it boils down to that. I think there's some interesting Eastern strains in Popper's thinking, and perhaps that, I think that's kind of needs to be drawn out more as well. We need to sort of almost de-anglicize the late Popper, really, get that the little common sense sort of pragmatic sort of Popper is just about doing science practically and improving the economy, and that, I mean, yes, he's about that, but that's only a small part of the story. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes. So
do we have time for the last question for John and then move on? Or?
Just I want to say I agree very much with the idea of you said about cosmology and all. But one thing you said that you talked about Popper's Neoplatonism with regard to World 3. I think it's very important to stress that his World 3 is a human creation. I think Popper very correctly rejected Platonic essentialism and Plato's theory of ideas as a mystifying nonsense, actually. And so World 3, yes, but it's a human product. Yeah, it's very important to remember that. Yeah.
Well, the response to that would be, yes, it's a human product, but it's a product that has emerged out of us, out of the cosmos and with us. So it is an actual feature of the real universe. It is something that needs to be accounted for. And
we do have to move on, unfortunately. For anyone who would like to continue this conversation with Alex, if you go to the breakout rooms at the bottom, and you can find with number 6 more with Alex Naraniecki. So now we're going to be moving on to remembering Joseph Agassi.